I often wear very decorated shirts, but only now do I realize that when I wear very decorated shirts in front of my very decorated books, it is a little bit much, but I'm just gonna go for the a lot today. So I haven't filmed in a little while, but I'm excited to talk about some of the books that I bought in January and February and the beginning of March, and books that I hope will bring you joy. They bring me joy. I love thrift stores. I buy my books for no more than $3 normally, and I normally have some delightfulness. I have a bunch of classics, I have a bunch of books that I've never heard about, and I would like to talk about them and hope to read. The way that I view my libraries is a collection of books that I can lend out to people and that I can read, and I really enjoy reading books that are, cool and make me think about the world. It's made me really happy because in February, more than any other time, I've lent out more books of my collection and just like had people be like, hey, yes, I want that book. And I'm like, yes, have it. I'm becoming like the librarian of my dreams. So that's making me happy. I was in Stratford for very sad reasons because I had taken someone to hospital. But during my time, I was like, I just need like a moment to like, de-stress and stuff like that. And Stratford happens to be the home of the Stratford Festival, which is the epicenter of Canadian theatre, and it is very renowned and has some beautiful Shakespearean work, theatre and theatre performances from around the world. And I am so, so excited for this year. I think I already have tickets for 6 plays and I'm super excited for them. I'm so excited to find this, which is the Norton Anthology of Modern African Drama. And I was like, yes, this is something that I love because I've been getting more and more and more into plays and I really, really love theater. And I was like, this is so cool. I don't know it. And I'm assuming someone named Bentley had it before me and used it for school or whatever. But it is, African plays are definitely not widely, seen and performed and talked about in literature in the Western world. And I think that that is something that is deeply sad. So I don't even know about all of these, but I cannot wait to read them. And also, look at this print. Like, you can see that it's like printing that like you can see and read really easily, and it's like a floppy book. Like I can't even hold it up, and I'm really excited to read this book. And it reads the first continentally representative body of African drama published in any language. Africa has 52 countries, and there's 8 plays in here. I do not think this represents the continent of Africa, but I'll take the colonialism. But we have The Fate of the Cockroach by Egypt, Intelligence Power by Algeria, Swizwi Banzi is Dead, Republic of South Africa, Death and the King's Horseman, Nigeria, Colson of Altars, Ethiopia, The Dilemma of a Ghost, Ghana, I Will Marry When I Want, Kenya, and Isu and the Vagabond of Mistrals, Nigeria. I'm not surprised that these are the African countries that you often see literature from, and you often don't see literature from a lot of the other countries in Africa. But I am still really excited for this and to read some of these books. And yeah, I got it for $3.50 and I was like, yes. At the same time, I got The Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. I actually don't know that much about it. It says on the back, The Curiosity Shop, 1840 to 1841, and it's a combination of sentimental and grotesque and socially concerned, and its story of pursuit and courage, which sets the downtrodden and plucky against the malevolent and the villainous, was an immediate popular success. Little Nell quickly became one of Dickens' most celebrated characters. My favorite thing about classic literature is sometimes they tell you everything but the plot, but I have heard that this is a really good book. I believe Katie from Books and Things loves it, although I watch a lot of people who talk about Dickens who I've never really went fully into the furlough of Dickens, but I have a bunch of his books and I do hope to read all of his books throughout the years. I am doing one at a time and I think he has like 27 books. So meet me in 2050 and I will have read all of Dickens and I'll talk to you about it. And the next 3 that I got at the shop, I was like, oh my goodness, this is the best day of my life. I got The Parable of the Sower and I am so excited. I've loved Kindred and I have been looking at this collection and it is quite expensive copy of the book. Well, I'm very cheap, but it's quite expensive and I've been hoping for this copy for such a long time and it's been like on my like cart on Indigo for like years. So when I saw this for like a good price, I was like, yes. So this is set in the future, which I think is actually currently, it's in the early 2020s, but this was written in the late 80s, early 90s. And it is about this woman who can see the future and stuff like that. And she is predicting things and people are not believing her. And I believe it's set in like a post-apocalyptic world. And yeah, I'm really interested to read it and to see it. The next book that I saw was a Puffin classic, and this is The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. George MacDonald was the man who really inspired both C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, and like has had because of that influence has had one of the most impact on modern fantasy, but is barely ever talked about as a Victorian author. And this is something that Cara from the Wilde Book Garden read earlier this year and really, really enjoyed it. And I'm just really excited to read it. It's like a children's classic, so it's written in like this really approachable writing and stuff. And yeah, I'm hoping to read it. And I also know that there's a few of my friends in the church have kids that are around like 5 to 7 and have been looking for like appropriate books to read them. They're like, we read like The Hobbit and we read like these other books or like Charlotte's Web, but we don't really want to go to middle grade yet. So after I read this, I'll know if I can pass it on to them, and that might be really, really fun too. So I'm excited. And then this one I've had such a journey with because I began with like completely writing it out. It's a video I actually still have not edited because school has been like crushing my soul and everything else. But on like January 2nd, I filmed a video that will be published one day that is about books that came out in 1923 that would be interesting to read in 2023. And I actually did not think that this was a book that I wanted to read off that list, and then Karl Anderson talked about it and I was like, oh, actually maybe I do. This is The Lost Lady by Willa Cather. And I really have liked some of her other works, but this sounded like it was much more going to be typical, like, Marian Forster brings delight to her husband, an elderly railroad pioneer, to the small town of Sweetwater, where they live. And I was like, that's not really my vibe. But then it was compared to, was it Gatsby? And other things where it's like looking at different kinds of social things and it's quite short. And I was like, oh, maybe I do want to read this. And I found it. So I've gone from being like, I'm not even going to talk about it on this list, to being like, I want it, to being like, hey, I own it. So 3 months can change the world. And then right at the beginning of January, I bought Her Body and Other Parties. This is a book that I actually already started rereading and have really, really enjoyed. It has been so far my least favorite of Machedo's work, but I'm really excited to reread it physically and see if I have a different thing. The Husband Stitch is just such a beautiful book. It also really goes with this outfit really well. Like, I love the design here. But this is one of her first short story collections and kind of where she started, and I really enjoy her later work. She really looks at like horror and feminism and twists them together in such an interesting way. And it's a short story. It casts from like the dystopian to like the 1960s to dealing how women are in the world and the ways in which they interact in different things, and it's so good. And then at the same time, I bought The Body Map, which this is a book I don't know anything about. I think it's like a locally published author who self-published it a few years ago, but it looks at disability and it looks at identity and stuff like that. And whenever I see a book like that, I'm like, I need to read this. And it's also poetry. So I write poetry about disability and about being a woman and being all of these things. So I was like, this is a good book to read and to understand. And I find that this is a very like haunting image on the cover. Like, it looks at things very interesting. So yeah, I'm really excited to look at the ways in which she like looks at and explores the way that people see her. So yeah, super excited. And then I will have a clip here because I went to the cutest bookstore that I didn't know like existed. It is like a street over from my house. Well, it's not that close, but it's like, it's in downtown, which is like quite close to me. And I was like so excited, and I have walked by it, driven by it so many times. And it's one of those shops that looks like it's just a house. And I was like, I saw the sign, but I was like, I don't think it's like a real bookstore. Anyways, I went out with one of my friends and she was like, this is my favorite bookstore. And I went, and it's like floor to ceiling books. Like, you know, when it's like all the way up and you're like, oh my goodness. And they weren't quite as cheap as some of the others, but I still bought like these books as well as 2 books for my friends for like quite cheap. And I was like, oh. So this is one book that I had heard a little bit about, but like couldn't remember the synopsis, but I was like, yes. And this is Sherwood Anderson's and Winesburg, Ohio. So this is a collection of short stories all interlinked, and it was originally published in 1919. I really love this era, and it's not the most like widely, a lot of the books that came out in this era are no longer in publication, and it makes me really, really sad. And yeah, I started reading it and I was like, yeah, I really like this. So if I pass the introduction and go to the first page, you know it's a good book when there's a long introduction. So I am this far in before I get to the thing. But the first book is called The Book of the Grotesque. The writer, an old man with a white mustache, had some difficulty in getting into bed. The windows of his house in which he lived were high, and he wanted to look at the trees. When he awoke, a carpenter came to fix the bed so that it would be on the level with the window. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. I like that a lot. Like, that is the style that I like of writing. And the description says, Winesburg, Ohio, 1919 is Sherwood Anderson's masterpiece, a cycle of short stories set in a small Ohio town at the end of the 19th century, at the center of George Willard, a young reporter who is confident in the town's grotesques, solitary figures for whom he is there conduit of expression and solace from loneliness. But George has his own longings, which eventually draw him away from home to seek a career in the city. He carries with him the dreams of the unuttered words of remarkable characters such as Win Babblebun, a disgraced former teacher, and the storytelling Dr. Percival. And I'm like, yeah, that's my kind of book. And then also short stories, because we're in my short story era, is Bliss and Other Stories by Catherine Mansfield. She died in 1929, and I've read some of her other books as well. She died very young of tuberculosis. I've also been really enjoying John Green's conversations on tuberculosis and how it still exists, and it is not treated because it is not one that affects most people in who are wealthy or live in a culture where there's a lot of wealth. Yeah, she died of tuberculosis as a very wealthy white woman in the early 20th century, but that is not the same that happens now, and that we need to kind of demystify this idea of the tuberculosis writer, because it leads into the thing that still allows it to seem like a disease in the past, even though it kills millions of people each year currently. So that is my rant about Bliss. But Bliss is a collection of short stories that sparkles with vitality and captures moments of telling significance. Widely recognized as one of the greatest writers of her period, Catherine Mansfield shows a supreme control over her technique. With the deftness of a movie camera, she zooms in with remarkable accuracy on those emotionally charged moments with an individual, and most revealing, her delicacy and childlike quality of her vision lend a freshness and a charm to her work that is enchanting. Conveying as much by omission as by statement, she creates a delicate structure of the reminiscent of Chekhov and a work of art that is akin to lyric poetry. That is a good description. That tells me nothing and yet tells me a lot. I think my favorite line is conveying as much by omission as by statement. You go, girl. So she died quite young and had a very interesting life. She was cousin of Elizabeth von Urnham, one of my other favorite authors from this period, and I read The Garden Party, which is the book or the short story that is widely collected in a lot of anthologies and stuff, and I'm excited to read more of her works and stuff. And when I saw this, I was like, yes, please. So those are my books. None of these are the way that we should have them. I want to be more organized, but currently in my life, I'm going to be slightly... I think these are all upside down. Currently in my life, I am learning about the fact that I will not be as organized as I always want to be, and yet I still want to make content because it makes me happy and joyful and all of these things. So let me know what has been giving you joy. Have you found any obscure random books, and where are you in life? Are you sad? Are you happy? Tell me about it. I have missed your guys' faces and your comments, and I'll see you next time.